The Pokemon world has gods, but they're not what you think they are. Lorekeeper Toby made a video recently that got me thinking. Over the years, I've had plenty of discussions and seen lots of videos about how each legendary has its own specific role within a large pantheon of Pokemon Gods. And that's just something I can't agree with. To help me explain that, let me take you on a journey. One that starts in 1996. In Generation 1, we find ourselves in the Kanto region, a land of scientific innovation and progress where we are tasked by Professor Oak to depart on a journey of discovery. The primary goal of the player is to complete the Pokédex, an experimental technology that creates a record of the species of Pokemon we catch and see, an encyclopedia of life, which we are field testing. While on our travels documenting the wildlife of the region, we encounter a host of scientific and technological marvels. We meet Bill, who does all the things Bill does, from revolutionary technology that impacts our day-to-day life, to terrifying technology that almost gets him trapped as a Pokemon forever. Silphco creates a device that lets us see ghosts. We travel to Cinnabar Island, where we revive long-extinct, fossilized Pokemon into living beings. And of course, there's Mew and Mewtwo. Mew, the first mythical Pokemon. Mew represents Luca, the last universal common ancestor, and is said to be the common ancestor of all Pokemon life, which at this time includes all the Kanto decks minus the man-made Pokemon like Porygon and Mewtwo. Mew's role in the games is as a biological answer to the origin of Pokemon life. And on February 6th, Mew gave birth. From Mew's genome, after years of horrific gene splicing and DNA engineering experiments, a scientist created Mewtwo. And it's only after battling our way through Kanto, earning all 8 gym badges and conquering the Elite Four as well as our rival, that we finally lay eyes on the ultimate achievement of human science. Mewtwo, the world's most powerful Pokemon. Mewtwo, the final boss of Gen 1, is a genetically engineered clone of Mew. It doesn't get much more sciencey than that. Throughout the game, we get hints and broken fragments of the lore behind Mewtwo. However, the same can't be said for the 3 other legendary Pokemon we are introduced to first. The legendary birds. The legendary birds are very interesting, specifically because they aren't. There is no lore about these Pokemon in Gen 1 outside of the decks. No storylines, and, to my knowledge, not even a single mention from an NPC. They aren't revered, they're not even known about. They are legendary in that they are rare and strong, however they are just normal Pokemon. What differentiates them in Gen 1 is that they are unique overworld encounters, and that only makes them slightly rarer than Snorlax, of which there are 2. In fact, while they are rare by normal standards, they are quite common for legendary Pokemon, even being rare spawns in Let's Go rather than unique encounters. It's also clear to me that within the world of the games, as well as IRL, they have always intended for these Pokemon to be capable of breeding. That mechanic didn't exist in Generation 1, and when it was introduced in Gen 2, the legendary Pokemon were excluded because of obvious game-breaking implications. However, there are plenty of things that suggest they reproduce. Firstly, how common they are for legendary Pokemon. Next, their regional forms. And lastly, in the OG Pokemon Snap, we actually see them hatch from eggs. Depending on how canon you believe Snap to be, I'm sure that either clinches it for you or means nothing. But behind the scenes, it shows that this was always their intention. Furthermore, we can apply the logic that in this game, they are descendants of Mew, as were all non-man-made Pokemon. Overall, the lack of lore and NPC interest, along with their relative abundance, makes it quite clear to me that these are just some big strong birds. There is nothing godly about them. In fact, there is no religious connection between any legendary Pokemon and the people of the Kanto region. However, in 1999, Pokemon introduces us to a land overflowing with tradition and spirituality, the Johto region. It's a striking cultural shift, and I would liken it most to travelling from Tokyo to Kyoto. Going from this populous, modern, urban city where people just get on with their daily lives versus a place that lives and breathes ancient tradition. As we journey through the towns of Johto, it becomes evident how intertwined the history of people and Pokemon are here. Shrines and landmarks dedicated to legendary Pokemon, NPCs telling stories of their region's past, and traditional practices are everywhere. Johto also introduces us to the first glimpses of religion in the Pokemon world, and it does so in a huge way. Towering monuments in honor of Pokemon like Ho-Oh and Bellsprout, as well as the blackened pile of rubble in memoriam of Lugia, and accompanying them is a tale of tragedy. In Johto's cultural heart, Ecruteak City, we learned how 150 years ago, the Brass Tower, Lugia's former roost, burned to the ground. Caught in the blaze were 3 Pokemon who tragically perished. However, watching this unfold was Ho-Oh, who, according to legend, revived the ill-fated trio and gave birth to 3 new legends. The legendary beasts, Entei, Raikou, and Suicune. The legendary beasts have an intriguing place in the world of Pokemon, because, like the legendary birds, they are extremely common, appearing in many other games and regions, including on several trainers' teams. This creates a disconnect between the lore of the Gen 2 games, which makes them sound like unique entities, and the reality of their existence in the series. Regardless, what matters is that in Johto, the traditions and stories are remembered and recounted, and there are monuments and artifacts dedicated to these creatures. While they never call them gods, there are clear signs of worship. It's evident that legendary Pokemon hold a similar place in people's lives and have done so for a very long time. One seemingly innocuous yet mightily important location can be found just west of Azalea Town, in the shadowy undergrowth of Elix Forest. There, where the canopy is so dense that no light touches the ground, creating a never-ending night, is a small shrine. Many people say that the shrine is a symbol of good luck and wards off evil spirits. Some others say the shrine is linked to the mythical Pokemon Celebi, which is believed to live inside it as the guardian of the forest. In Japanese, the shrine is called the Ubame Forest Hokora, and now I tie everything together. You see, a Hokora is a small Shinto shrine. Shinto is a fascinating religion, especially when viewed from a Western perspective. Firstly, because religion is a tenuous descriptor at best. Shinto has no single creator or specific doctrine, and instead exists in a diverse range of local and regional forms. And unlike Abrahamic religions or Greek mythology, it doesn't have true gods. Shinto is a polytheistic and animistic religion that revolves around supernatural entities called the kami. While sometimes translated into English as God or Spirit, the kami are fundamentally different. In fact, the historian of religion, Joseph Kitagawa, believes these translations to be quite unsatisfactory and misleading. While there is no strict definition, the kami are believed to inhabit all things, including awe-inspiring forces of nature and prominent landscape locations. Kami are seen to inhabit both the living and the dead, organic and inorganic matter, and natural disasters like earthquakes, droughts, and plagues. Their presence is seen in natural forces such as the wind, rain, fire, and sunshine. However, the biggest difference between the kami and the gods of the Abrahamic religions that, as Westerners, we are most familiar with, is that kami don't possess any kind of objective divinity. Metaphysically, they are the same as humans. They aren't omnipotent, omniscient, or even necessarily immortal. In fact, it's even possible for people to become kami, in life as well as in death. Kami are usually associated with a specific place, often a prominent landmark feature such as a waterfall, mountain, large rock, or distinctive tree. And shrines are constructed in these areas to worship them. Kami can be both positive and negative forces in people's lives. This is why offerings and prayers are given to the kami to gain their blessings and dissuade them from acts of destruction. Shinto is all about living in harmony with the kami. As Japan's indigenous religion, Shinto is really worth looking into in your own time. However, after my little foray into religion, it should be obvious how this applies to legendary Pokemon like Celebi, Ho-Oh, and Lugia. They are awe-inspiring creatures whose power could fairly be described as divine. Celebi's ability to take people through time, Ho-Oh's sacred flames, and Lugia's devastating gale force winds. The people of Johto clearly thought so, as they constructed each a place of worship, offering them shelter, gifts, and still to this day, carrying on long-standing traditions such as the Kimono Girls. The Kimono Girls can be thought of as priestesses or shrine maidens, who guard relics associated with the legendary Pokemon, such as the clear and tidal bells, small bells used in Shinto practices called Suzu, and perform ritual dances called Kagura, which, as we witness, have the power to summon Ho-Oh and Lugia to specific locations. During our Johto experience, the location in which Lugia is summoned is the Whirl Islands. That's because, as the story goes, Lugia once roosted atop the brass tower similar to Ho-Oh, but after the tower burnt down 150 years ago, Lugia never returned. These events echo Shinto beliefs. Kami are believed to be mobile, visiting different places of worship. When a Shinto shrine is destroyed, the kami residing there is considered to leave that physical space, often returning to the natural world from where they originated. And that could mean going to another prominent location with which it is associated, such as a waterfall. With this context, it's easier to understand how Lugia's moniker as the Guardian of the Seas has been misinterpreted by Pokemon's Western audience. For us, that conjures the image of a god that rules over the oceans like Poseidon, which is why I believe fans try to fit Pokemon like Lugia into this kind of mold. However, from a Shinto perspective, Lugia and the other legends represent Kami, a localized force with whom humans have sought to cultivate a mutually beneficial relationship, seeking protection and favor in return for worship and offerings. Similarly, it's easy to see how Shinto descriptions of Kami apply to the next generation of legends. In Gen 3, we travel to the island paradise of Hoenn, where we encounter legendary Pokemon on a scale heretofore unimaginable. The Weather Trio, aka the super ancient Pokemon, Groudon, Kyogre, and Rayquaza. Primal forces of nature that represent drought and earthquakes, rain, floods, and tsunamis, as well as the heavens themselves. To the people of Hoenn, their battle was the most shocking and terrifying event in the region's history. A storm so fierce they thought it was going to destroy the world. Yet, no other region has stories of a storm like this. IRL, it makes sense. It makes sense for the lore of one game to stay in that game. But from inside the game world, it seems like this cataclysmic event comes down to a matter of perspective. To those living it, it was the end of days. But it's possible the real scale of the devastation was localized and didn't affect the rest of the world. What's more, these events took place a long time ago, and since then, the people of Hoenn have moved on and largely forgotten. Hoenn has remnants of what were likely important spiritual practices. The solemn peak of Mount Pyre, the cryptic puzzles of the desert ruins, ancient tomb, and island cave, Sutopolis' Cave of Origin, and the Tower of Heaven, Sky Pillar. The region is also home to mysterious and ancient Pokemon like Claydol, Relicanth, Shedinja, and the Regis. But as I said, in Hoenn, these ancient myths and legends have largely been forgotten. This distinguishes it from Kanto, where they didn't exist to begin with, and Johto, where they are still alive today. Instead, the theme of Hoenn is science, and how it works in collaboration with and exploitation of the natural world. The land of science, the land of natural religion, and the land where science and nature coexist, which form a rather cohesive trilogy. Hoenn has spaceships, meteorology, mining, and of course, Sea Morville. Or as push the boundaries of what topics a Pokemon game could discuss. It took the intangible spiritual concept of life energy or bioenergy introduced in Gen 6's first games, X and Y, and showed us humans who saw it as nothing but a resource to be exploited. These people concretized and monetized this ethereal concept, culminating in the creation of Seymourville, a Pokemon oil rig. Countless Pokemon had their life energy siphoned like crude oil and refined into a commodity to be bought and sold. Infinity Energy. Of course, by the time of the game, Seymourville is no longer active, and in penance for their crimes against nature, the site is now a wildlife reserve. In true Hoenn fashion, very little evidence remains, and we are left to decipher the crumbs. What we uncover in our investigation is that no force came to stop Moorville from the outside. No god or guardian, angered by the callousness of human greed, came to save the Pokemon of Hoenn's seas. The lesson we learned is that it was the morality of people like Watson, that put an end to the project. Additionally, Seymourville is some of the first evidence that suggests the Pokemon world is facing an energy crisis, a plotline that will become a huge part of Gen 8's Sword and Shield. Gen 6 introduces Mega Evolutions as well as something special for Kyogre and Groudon, Primal Reversions, awakened forms that Pokemon can unlock with the aid of special stones. I like to interpret this idea as Pokemon having forms which, under normal conditions, they don't have enough bioenergy to access. With the abundance of life in modern times, the finite amount of energy on Earth is being decentralized, meaning that all living things get a smaller piece of the pie. While talking about the themes and lessons of these games, we've strayed from the core concept of the video a bit. The place of legendary Pokemon in the Pokemon world. And we're not done with the legendary Pokemon of Hoenn. Rayquaza's place within the Weather Trio, being the one to stop the fighting between Kyogre and Groudon, makes fans believe it was given this role by a higher power. Personally, I see it as just the natural balance that these three titans have fallen into. Being more or less confined to the same geographic region, Rayquaza was affected by the conflict, same as the people of Hoenn, which is why it felt it necessary to intervene. However, this behaviour was likely reinforced by the early people of Hoenn. In Gen 3, Rayquaza is the only Pokemon of the trio to have a monument constructed to venerate it, Sky Pillar, indicating it had earned the worship of the locals which it had saved. Oras once again goes a step further beyond with the addition of the Draconoid people. However, the games still maintain the themes of Hoenn by having Sky Pillar be abandoned in the modern day. Similarly, the Regis also fall within these themes, being a total mystery in Gen 3. They're nearly impossible to get, with almost no explanation about their existence or the tombs they were sealed in. Deoxys, however, falls into the other side of Hoenn's equation. It's a science-based Pokemon. DNA from an extraterrestrial virus that mutated into a living creature after being hit by a laser beam. Since the Delta episode gave us Deoxys, Hoenn's only true mythical Pokemon is Jirachi. In-game, barely anything is known about Jirachi. However, its dex entries and design are directly inspired by Shintoism. The blue things hanging from Jirachi are Tanzaku, strips of paper on which wishes are written during the Star Festival, Tanabata. The dex entry even says, a legend states that Jirachi will make true any wish that is written on notes attached to its head when it awakens, implying that it holds a place directly equivalent to Kami. Lastly, we have some personal favourites of mine. Great movie, great in Pokedoku, and endlessly intriguing. The Eon Duo. What makes these two so special is that they were the first, and still some of the only, legendaries with gender. Furthermore, they are common legendary Pokemon. The dex even states they make a small herd of several members, and the fifth movie shows them with juveniles. This pair represents clear evidence that legendary Pokemon breed. And it's not just these two, but others as well. Latias and Latios' lore invokes the idea they reproduce sexually, however the game mechanics won't allow it. They breed, but for us it's still no egg group discovered. In my opinion, this is the devs straight up telling us legendary Pokemon are beings that we don't fully understand, but they breed, live and die just like everything else. They are Kami. Their lifestyles and lifespans might be incomprehensible to us, and they have unrivaled powers worthy of admiration and worship, but they are just Pokemon. But then Gen 4 comes and switches things up. Sinnoh introduces the Creator, a monotheistic, Abrahamic god, Arceus, with his angels and archangels. It's a sharp turn, but it's important to remember that Gen 4 was never meant to exist. They had only planned to make the first 3 generations, and therefore Gen 4 represents a change in the series. And it does change things for the Pokemon world, and introduces more ambiguity into the nature of legendary Pokemon, which in turn has led to these ideas of an all-encompassing legendary pantheon. However, I still believe there is a split between the gods of Gen 4 and the majority of legendary Pokemon. The themes of the second trilogy are definitely more spiritual, with God in Gen 4, truth and ideals in Gen 5, and life and death in Gen 6. But alongside all the creationist legendary Pokemon, Gen 4 also introduces the Lunar duo, Cresselia and Darkrai, mythical Pokemon that have nothing to do with the plot of the games. Instead, they rekindle the folkloric aspects of legendaries, with tales linking them to the waxing and waning of the moon, and their abilities to give people either restful sleep or horrific nightmares. It's easy to see how one Pokemon would become a symbol of hope and joy, and the other a symbol of darkness and fear. One loved by the people of Sinnoh, and one hated, despite that just being their nature. Following our pilgrimage through Sinnoh, we travel to Unova in Gen 5, which introduces the forces of nature. Very common legendary Pokemon that not only embody the Kami philosophy of earlier legendaries, but that are outright based on them. Bulbapedia says that with Enamorus, some fans even call them the Kami Quartet. Funnily enough, the OG3 were all 100% male, and based on their number and gender, people suspected that they could breed. And now we have this 100% female Enamorus, it might be confirmed. It certainly fueled more speculation. They also have a place of worship, the Abundant Shrine, or Fertility Shrine in Japanese, where they appear, and their relic, the Reveal Glass, is given to us by an old man along with a lecture on their lore. Additionally, there are a couple of other examples of legendary Pokemon that likely breed. Heatran can be male or female, and the Manaphy-Phione situation is already a wild element of the whole concept, but Pokemon Legends Arceus made it even more interesting by allowing you to get a whole bunch of wild Phione even after catching Manaphy. Meaning there are likely multiple Manaphy in the game, and they're breeding with, maybe Ditto in the wild. Plus, even before Pokemon Legends Arceus, you could already get multiple Manaphy in the same game via legitimate means. At the end of the day, this is not an exhaustive list of every legendary Pokemon and where they fit in this Kami versus God classification. It's all open to discussion and interpretation. I just wanted to highlight that lots of legendary Pokemon have a natural role in the Pokemon world. Divided by niches and regions, they might fit into neat categories, but it doesn't mean they all have a connection to Arceus, and it doesn't mean they are all gods with a divine purpose. Toby was the person who first inspired me to make content, and he's still inspiring me today. So I hope that I can also inspire some discussion and creativity. And that's why I would encourage you to please leave your comments down below, and if you want, make your own video with your thoughts. Hello, this has been the 31st. How's it going? Goodbye. We learn how 150 years ago, the Brass Tower, Luigi's, did it again.